Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored, Never Boring. Something a little bit different today. I'm doing a playthrough, but I'm doing a playthrough of a game that I haven't played before. I've read the rules, I've assembled the miniatures, I've looked through all the cards, but I haven't actually played it yet. So this is a proper learning experience. So if you're looking for a competent playthrough by someone who knows all of the rules, this is not the place to look. This is the Harry Potter miniatures adventure game, and it looks kind of neat, but the rulebook is a bit of a mess, and there's a lot of things I've looked at and thought, well, I'm not entirely sure how that works, but let's just throw it all on the table and get going, really. So the first thing I did was I selected a scenario, and there are a whole bunch of scenarios in the back of the book, which is really good, and I selected the Escape from Malfoy Manor. Unfortunately, the starter set doesn't include Draco Malfoy or his parents or Bellatrix or Dobby or any of the characters who are actually involved in that particular encounter. But we're going to use, for the good guys, we're going to use Harry, Hermione and Ron because those are the only three good guys you get in the starter set. And then for the bad guys, we're going to use a couple of Death Eaters and 3 swarms of Acromantulas. I could have used more Death Eaters, but I'm trying to keep it a little bit simple, and the Acromantulas, because they don't do magic and they can't have items, they're a little bit simpler, so it's a little bit less for me to think about on camera. As I understand it, the game is pretty much designed around a minimum of 50 points per side when you're constructing your teams, but you can't really get to 50 points for good guys in this particular starter set. So I've built to 30 points, and that does throw up some interesting problems. Mainly, it seems to be the case that certain spells become overpowered in smaller games. For example, in this particular scenario, the aim is Ron, Hermione and Harry, over here in this starter zone, they have to escape. They have to get over to this objective marker here, which I've put on a thick piece of white card to make it stand out on the video. And if I can get 2 of my characters to stand there at the end of the game, which will last for 6 turns, and I will be tracking the turns with this green dice over here, but if they can get 2 of their characters over to that objective marker for the end of the game, they score 10 victory points. Of course, the bad guys will score victory points for preventing that from happening, and it seems like the easiest way to prevent that from happening would be to load out Death Eaters with Petrificus Totalis, which is this particular spell here. The problem with Petrificus Totalis is it freezes the target in place and they cannot move, they cannot act, which means they cannot get to the objective and win the game. Of course, there is a way to break Petrificus Totalis, and that involves doing a magic challenge with a target value of 18. And the way challenges seem to work in this particular game is you don't roll dice or anything, you just need to get a certain number of characters within a range of the challenge, and then they all add in their trait values. For example, Harry here has a magic of 7. The problem is that even with all 3 of my good guys combined, we only have a magic value of 18, and the person who is actually frozen by the spell cannot contribute their own magic value, which means if anybody is frozen with Petrificus Totalis, they're out of the game for the rest of the game, and you can pretty much cast this spell every other turn. So if you've got multiple Death Eaters with that spell, you can probably freeze all the good guys in place within the first couple of turns, and that's game over. Another thing to note is that only the Acromantulas have an innate ability to cause damage, which means every other character that you bring from the starter set at least, you have to equip them with an item or a spell that will do some damage. So bearing that all in mind, this is what I've come up with. I've come up with 2 30-point forces. We have Harry, who actually has the innate ability Expecto Patronum. This is almost certainly not going to get cast in this particular playthrough because the main point of that is to deal with Dementors, and we don't have any Dementors. So I've also given him the Stupefy spell because that's actually a way of inflicting damage. Hermione gets a counter spell, which is quite difficult to pull off in smaller games. It requires 3 power, and I'm only generating 5 power a turn. So again, I don't know how often that's going to get used, But I've also given her the Stupefy spell, so she's got some combat effectiveness, and I've also given her the Time Turner, partly because it's a little bit thematic, and partly because it enables her to move faster, and we're going to be able to get to those objectives quicker. Ron has the innate spell Confundo, which reduces the number of actions an enemy target can take by 1. And then, rather than giving him another spell, I've given him a sword so he can go whacking spiders. For the bad guys, I've gone for more of a swarm tactic. We've got 3 loads of acromantulas, which are going to fill up the board, prevent easy movement around the board, hopefully inflict some damage, take out some of these characters. I've then selected the Death Eater, who has the innate spell Impedimenta, which actually prevents the target from moving in a turn, which of course plays into this particular scenario where I want to stop them getting to an objective. I gave him the Stupefy spell because otherwise he wouldn't be able to attack in any other way, and I gave him the Death Eater wand, which just improves his chances of casting a spell once per game. The second Death Eater gets Stupefy as an innate ability, so already has some combat effectiveness. So of course, for the second spell option, I chose Impedimenta, and then I also gave her a Death Eater wand and a Death Eater mask. The Death Eater mask is just a one-time use thing to reduce the amount of damage she takes. So that's it in terms of actually creating the teams. Those are 30-point teams, which are just a very light, quick skirmish setup. Really, this is a game that's going to require some expansions to really get the most out of it. You're going to want some extra characters. You're going to want some extra cards, some extra spells, extra items, because you don't get a lot of variety in the starter set. You just get enough to get a feel for what you're doing. I've set up the board as per the scenario with our good guys at this end of the board. The bad guys had 2 deployment zones. I have split them up so that they can create a pincer movement. We have put out some terrain elements on the incredibly flimsy cardstock. We have impassable terrain here that will block movement and line of sight. More impassable terrain over there, blocking movement and line of sight. And then we have some difficult terrain over there, which will just slow down people and provide cover. The last thing we have to do is draw 3 quest cards for each team. When you draw the quest cards, you can choose 1 to discard and replace, and then those are your 3 quests at the start of the game, and each time you complete a quest, you can draw another one. This reminded me a little bit of Warhammer Underworlds with the objective cards. So for the good guys, we've picked Find the Lair. When any friendly model ends its activation in a space within or adjacent to the opponent's deployment zone, score 2 victory points, then discard this card. That's obviously pretty good because I'm going to be passing by the deployment zones to get to the end objective. We drew Treasure. Your opponent places an objective marker within 4 spaces of any board edge. Any friendly model in a space adjacent to the marker during its activation can take a Wisdom 10 challenge. If successful, score 1 victory point, then discard both the marker and this card. And that objective is just here. Finally, we drew Defeat Them. When 2 enemy models are removed from play in the same round, score 2 victory points and discard this card. I'm not convinced I will be able to actually complete this particular challenge, but maybe if I focus on hitting a couple of acromantulas with swords, we might get there. Each team gets their own set of quest cards, and in the starter set is 2 identical decks, and it just so happens that when I drew cards for the Death Eaters, we got a couple of the same objectives. We got Find the Lair, where we have to get one of our models into the enemy's deployment zone. I'm hoping I can just scurry along with one of the little spiders and achieve that objective quite quickly. And that first objective works quite nicely with the more the better. When you score any number of victory points during a round, score 1 additional victory point. And then we have Treasure. Your opponent places an objective marker within 4 spaces of a board edge, and then you have to do a Wisdom 10 challenge to achieve it. So we have placed a treasure marker just here. These quest cards obviously provide the tactical flexibility to go for other types of victory points, but you should never forget the main scenario objective, because that's where the big victory points are. It's very unlikely that you're going to be able to score enough bonus victory points to win the game if your opponent achieves the objective, which I think is probably a slight flaw with this particular scenario. I think scoring 10 victory points for getting to the objective, or 10 points for stopping the good guys from reaching the objective, it's just too much of a head start in winning. I don't think you could claw back that many victory points from quests. It should probably be a little bit more balanced so that you have alternative routes to victory. Regardless, we're basically ready to start. And once again, I must remind you, this is my first time playing. There will be mistakes. This is me learning how to play. Anyway, first of all, we start the turn with a start phase, but there's nothing to do in this particular start phase. We then go to a magic phase where we have to replenish our magic pool. And you're supposed to use these tokens to represent your magic power points, but these tokens are rubbish, so I will not be using these. I have these delightful coloured glass gems instead. We have 5 gems, which represents the light magic that our heroes will be generating, because Harry generates 2, Hermione generates 2, and Ron generates 1. So that's their power pool. And then I have 2 black gems, which represent the dark magic that our Death Eaters generate, because they both generate 1 each, and the Acromantulas do not generate any. Next, we would pay any upkeep for spells that are already in play. We don't have any. And then we would advance our cooldown clocks for any spells we have cast, but we haven't cast any spells yet. So we go straight to the initiative phase, and the initiative phase, you basically look at who has the most power points, and in this case, it's our good guys. So our good guys claim the initiative, and they get to draw an event card. The event card I've drawn says Exhausted. The model activated when this event is played cannot act. Its activation ends immediately. However, choose one of your opponent's models, and that model may not be activated this round. So clearly, we've started the battle already a little bit tired. I guess I'm going to select Ron from my side to be tired, so Ron will miss his turn, and I will pick this Death Eater here, and he will miss his turn. What an exciting way to start a game. The next thing we have to do is draw 3 adventure cards, and I am already beginning to see the same kind of issues here that I had with another design of Mark Latham's, which was the Elder Scrolls Call to Arms, where I just want to start playing, I just want to start moving my miniatures around, I just want to start fighting, but instead I've got to draw a card, then I've got to draw another card. We're not getting anywhere at the moment, but anyway, I've got to draw 3 adventure cards. So these adventure cards offer one-time bonuses, and whenever a player activates a model, they get to take one of these cards if they want to and use one of the 2 options on it. So we have here, you can add 1 die to this model's next attack roll, or you can gain 2 free power points to use during the model's activation. We have +1 die to a next attack roll, or 2 free power points, or move 1 more space during its move action, or +1 die to its next defense roll. And those go to the side of the board, and the player who started the round, the player who had the initiative, doesn't get to pick one on their first activation. The first card can be picked by the person who doesn't have initiative. So I guess it's kind of a balancing mechanism, because generally the person who has initiative will only get 1, but the person who doesn't will get 2. I'm going to put those there and probably forget about them, because the more little cards there are scattered around the edges of the battlefield, the more likely it is that I'll just forget they were ever there. So this might have sounded like a slightly muddled way to start the battle, but let's recap. The good guys won initiative. Because they won initiative, they drew an event card. I have to apply the event card at the point that I make my first activation. I chose to activate Ron, so Ron misses his turn, but I also then got to pick this Death Eater to miss their turn. Play then passes to the person who doesn't have initiative. They draw the 3 adventure cards and lay them out, and now they actually have a chance to take one of those adventure cards as they select a model to activate. Obviously, we cannot activate this Death Eater, so we can pick one of the other models. I'm going to select to move one of the Acromantulas from the top side of the board. Acromantulas get special bonuses. They are fast, which means they can move an extra 2 spaces over open terrain, and they have the scout ability, which means they treat difficult terrain as open terrain, which means I can move 5 spaces because a standard move is up to 3 spaces. Furthermore, I can take one of these adventure cards which says move 1 additional space during your move action, which I'm going to do, so one of my Acromantulas is going to have a massive burst of speed and move 6 spaces. So that Acromantula is racing to the deployment zone of the good guys in order to pick up some early victory points based on the quest cards I have. Initiative now goes back to the heroes. Of course, Ron has already activated this turn, although he has done nothing. We are going to move Harry. On an activation, a model can do one basic action and one advanced action. A basic action is moving or drinking a potion. An advanced action is attacking or using a spell. Of course, our Acromantula on the first activation didn't have an option to do an advanced action, so we've just moved on. But Harry does have the spell Stupefy, so we are going to see if we can make a start on inflicting a little bit of damage on something. We're going to start by moving 3 spaces. Harry has the Stupefy spell, which has a range of 4, so the Acromantula is within range and is within line of sight. Line of sight in this game is worked out by choosing a corner of the square you are on and drawing 2 lines from that corner to 2 different corners on your opponent's square, and if both of those lines are clear, you can see. And Stupefy costs 1 power point to use. So we spend our 1 power point. Now our opponent has a chance to use Counterspell if they have it, or some other reaction. We don't have any reactions to use. Because our opponent isn't able to stop the spell from happening, we can now make our casting roll. We will roll 3 dice, and each result of a 3 or more is a success. We will add our mastery, which is the number of wands on our character card, which is 2, and then we will compare it to the difficulty of the spell, which is 0. So we've had a total of 5 successes, which easily beats the difficulty value of the spell, which is 0. Our Acromantula now gets to make a defense roll. We roll 3 dice, and we add the number of defense shields on the Acromantula card, which is 1. So we have got 1 success so far. We can get up to 3 more. That's 1 success and 2 failures. So we have 5 successes for attacking against 2 successes for defending. Which means we have hit and successfully damaged the Acromantula. The Acromantula will now take the amount of damage listed on the spell, which is the target model suffers 1 physical damage. Now, damage in this game is a little bit wonky. For reasons best known only to the designer, each model has 4 hit points, and when you take damage, you have to use hit markers to represent the amount of damage received. These are hit markers, ranging from 1 to 4. They don't have numbers on, they have this symbol which gradually gets more elaborate the more damage you take. The tokens are flimsy, the iconography is not very clear, I'm sure for Harry Potter fans. I think it's like a Horcrux thing or something, I don't know. But I'm sure for Harry Potter fans it all makes perfect sense, but at a glance it is not easy. If you have just one of these on your character card, if you've just got that on your character card, it's not immediately apparent that you've taken 3 damage. So I'm not going to be using those, I'm going to use some dice. We have here our scary Lord of the Rings combat dice. We're going to put it next to the model to show that he has taken 1 wound. The last thing we have to do is flip our token on the Stupefy spell. This is our cooldown token. We have to flip it to the red side to show that we have cast the spell and it is now active. We will not be able to use Stupefy again until it cools down. Next up, the evil players get to activate again, and we are going to activate another Acromantula swarm because we can actually get into base contact with Harry now and attack him with a physical attack. Remember, Acromantulas have the fast ability, which enables them to move an additional 2 spaces. Making a physical attack is very similar to casting a spell. First of all, you have to roll for successes. You roll your 3 dice, you add any bonus for the particular type of attack you are doing, and then your opponent rolls defense dice, and then whoever gets the highest number of successes wins the round. The Acromantula has a bash ability, which is a bonus of 0, so we're just getting the result of the 3 dice with no extra modifiers. But that is 3 hits. Harry now defends as normal. Harry actually has a defense value of 2, so he only needs 1 success to block all of this damage. And he gets 2 successes, so that is completely nullified. And yes, as I rolled that dice, I realised that I could have used one of these adventure cards, which would have given me +1 die to my next attack roll, which would have given me an extra attack for this Acromantula Swarm. However, it still wouldn't have been enough to cause any damage because Harry rolled 2 successes anyway. Next up, Hermione is going to activate, and we're going to try and put some more damage on that Acromantula Swarm at the top of the board, in the hopes that we can kill it before it is able to score those victory points from the quest objectives. Hermione moves 3 for her basic action, and then she is going to cast Stupefy, so we spend our 1 power point. We're rolling 3 attack dice and adding 2 successes to the result. I am going to pick this adventure card, which says +1 die to its next attack roll, so I'll be rolling 4 dice. That's 2 successes plus the 2 from her card for a total of 4. The Acromantula gets to defend with 3 dice, adding 1 to the results. That's 4 defense, so that deflects all of that damage and that spell is wasted. But we do have to rotate this counter. And by the way, I should point out, because someone will mention in the comments that I've got my character cards laid out incorrectly. Normally, they've got slots at the bottom for the number of spells they're allowed, and then slots at the top for the number of items they are allowed. However, in order to get everything on camera, I have reworked everything. But for example here, Hermione would be allowed 2 additional spells and 2 additional items, whereas Ron can have 2 additional items but only 1 additional spell. But it's just laid out differently so that I can get it all on camera. Next up, we're going to move the Death Eater at the top of the board. And this Death Eater is going to cast Impedimenta on Hermione. That costs 1 magic point, so we discard our magic point. And now Hermione has a chance to react, and she actually has the counterspell, and she has enough power points to use it. The difficulty of the counterspell is equal to the number of power points spent to cast the spell plus 1, so we have a difficulty of 2. And Hermione gets 2 successes on any spell she casts anyway. So effectively, without rolling, I've already succeeded in cancelling that spell. But it has used all of my remaining power. Additionally, Counterspell is active and it has a very slow cooldown. It's going to be 3 turns before I can use that again. But unfortunately for the Death Eater, the spell doesn't work and we still have to flip the spell to the activated side. Play now goes back to the good guys, but the good guys have nothing to do because everybody is activated, so we go back to the bad guys to move our final Acromantula Swarm. And that finishes the round. There is an end phase, but there's nothing to do there, so we go back to the start phase. Again, nothing to do there, but in the next phase, the magic phase, we have to replenish our power points, so the good guys will get 5 again, and the bad guys will get 2. Next, we would have to pay upkeep on any spells that have an upkeep value, but none of the spells we have cast have that, so we move straight on to the cooldown step where we have to advance all of our cooldown clocks. And we do that by rotating the token on top of the spell. So we can see here that the Stupefy spell, we rotate it 1, and it says cooldown 1, which means we cannot use that spell this round. And man, these tokens need to be a lot thicker for this kind of fiddly token twisting. It is now the initiative phase. Because none of our good guys are dead, we still have a full 5 cunning in the pool, so they will have the initiative, they will have the first round again. So again, the good guys will draw an event card. We have drawn Tactical Vision. Draw a card from the adventure deck. This card may only be played by you at the start of one of your own activations this round. If the card has not been used when the round ends, it is discarded. So that's really good. That's a massive bonus for the good guys. And the card we have chosen says +2 to the next challenge, or take 1 challenge for a marker within 4 spaces this round instead of being adjacent. So I've put that adventure card on the corner of the board, and of course I forgot that at the end of the round we have to discard any adventure cards that aren't used. So this card from last round goes, and we have to draw 3 new adventure cards. I'm not going to go through all those adventure cards and what they do. They will crop up in play if I remember to use them, but I want to speed things up a little bit now because we've got through a whole round and we just want to crack on, really. So we have to pick one of our good guys to start the round, and of course remember, this particular character is not eligible for using any of these 3 adventure cards, although he or she can still use this particular adventure card, which was acquired through one of the events. And we are going to start by activating Hermione, and she's going to run away. For her basic action, she's going to move 3. For her advanced action, she is going to use her Time Turner ability. The Time Turner costs the advanced action for the round, but can either be used to advance the clock on a spell by 1, or move 3 spaces, move to anywhere within 3 spaces. So that's what she's going to do. She's just going to try and get up towards the objective. And that finishes her activation. Next up, we will move our injured Acromantula Swarm. The Acromantula Swarm is now in the good player's objective zone, so we'll score some quest points in a moment. But before we do that, we are going to attack Ron. We're doing a basic bash, so it's just 3 dice. Also, why are the Acromantulas doing a bash? Why isn't it a bite? We've got 2 successes there, and unfortunately Ron gets 2 automatic successes when he defends, so we don't even need to roll. But that's okay, because this Acromantula Swarm has done what it set out to do. It has got into the objective zone, so we have scored some points. First of all, we have scored Find the Lair. When any friendly model ends its activation in a space within or adjacent to the opponent's deployment zone, score 2 victory points. And we can also score the more the better at the same time. When you score any number of victory points during a round, score 1 additional victory point. So that is a total of 3 victory points, and now I have to draw 2 new quest cards to replace them. We have drawn Land Grab. If at the end of any round at least 2 friendly models are in a space within or adjacent to the opponent's deployment zone, score 2 victory points and then discard this card. I can score that pretty easily. The second one is Defend. If there are no enemy models in a space within or adjacent to your original deployment zone at the end of the game, score 3 victory points. Now, that does raise a question because I had 2 original deployment zones for this particular map, but we'll deal with that when we get to it. Oh, and by the way, I do realise that I was very silly with Hermione over there, and she could have actually moved into the enemy deployment zone and scored her own Find the Lair card this turn, but I didn't do it, so that was that. Right, let's activate Ron next, and Ron is going to hit the Acromantula with his sword first. The sword is a physical attack. He gets a bonus of 2 to his dice roll, so he's rolling 3 dice and adding 2. That's 2 successes, total of 4 successes. The Acromantula rolls 3 dice in defense and adds 1 success. That's 2 successes and another one, that's 3 total. So Ron successfully hits the spider, and this attack with the sword does 2 physical damage, making this the most powerful attack on the table for this game. So we have to advance our damage dice on the Acromantula to 3. So that was Ron's advanced action for the turn. He's now going to make a basic move action. Next up, we will attack Harry with the Acromantula directly in front of him. 3 dice, no bonuses. But that is 3 hits. Harry automatically blocks 2. And easily defends. But the Acromantula still has a move, and we are going to use that move to get into the good deployment zone. We are now in a position to score Land Grab at the end of this round, but not yet. So next up, Harry is going to move. He is going to move 3 spaces. And then because he might as well, he's going to try to cast Expecto Patronum. Although there are no Dementors on the board, it does give a +1 defense to models within 2 spaces. So it'll have a small amount of benefit. He can cast it between him and Ron, and it will protect them both. So it costs 3 magic to cast, and this is quite a tricky spell. If we look at the card here, we can see we need 4 successes to make this happen. We get 2 as standard because we're Harry, and we got another 2 successes there from our spell casting, so we can place the Patronum marker. Look, it's a little stag. So both Ron and Harry will have +1 defense while that Patronum marker is in play. Oh, and of course we have to flip this. Right, we might as well activate our third Acromantula Swarm. There's absolutely no point in attacking because I can get a maximum of 3 successes. Ron gets a minimum of 3 successes in defense because of the Patronum, so it's a standoff. So we'll just skip straight to the Death Eaters. This Death Eater is going to cast Stupefy on Hermione. We spend our 1 power. We've got 3 successes there, plus 2 from our card, for a total of 5. Hermione blocks 2 as standard and gets 3 defense. But she only blocks another 2, so 1 gets through, which means she does take a damage. Not idly do the leaves of Lorien fall. So there we go, Hermione has taken a wound, and this Stupefy spell has been activated. Now our second Death Eater will move, and he is going to use his final power point to attempt to cast Impedimenta on Hermione. That's only 1 additional success, so that's 3 total. Hermione gets 3 defense. She has rolled a defense, which added to her 2 defenses standard means she has blocked the spell. And we rotate the spell token to its activated side. And that's the end of the round, and once again, I completely forgot to use any of these adventure cards. But those are all discarded now anyway. So a new round begins, we replenish our power pool. We have to pay any upkeep. Our Patronum spell has an upkeep value. We can pay 2 and it will stay in effect. And I think it's probably worth it because it is protecting at the moment Harry and Ron. So I'm going to pay the 2 now to keep the Patronum in play. Next we advance all of our clocks. Expecto Patronum advances to the first. Now with the Stupefy spell, when we advance it to the second position, it actually says keep turning. So then we advance it to the third position, and it says keep turning again. So we advance it to the 4th position, which is the top, which means it flips back to the blue side and we can cast Stupefy this turn. Counterspell takes a lot longer to reactivate, so actually just moves to the 2nd position. This Impedimenta moves to the 1st position. This Impedimenta moves to the 3rd position. And this Stupefy moves to the 1st. Oh, I'll tell you something else we've forgotten to do. We've been forgetting to advance that clock. We're on turn 3. Turn 3 of 6. Harry and Hermione need to get a wiggle on if they want to score those victory points. So first we draw an event card. It says Dark Shadows. Any spells with a range value cast during this round have their range reduced by 2 spaces to a minimum of 1. So things like Stupefy will only have a range of 2. I'm probably going to forget to do that, aren't I? If I put it there, I might remember. It's not likely though. Next we draw our adventure cards. I've got to say, I see what they were doing with these adventure cards. It means each round you have new tactical options, you have new things that you can pull off, new things you can try out, but they are easy to forget, they are easy to overlook, and I just think they're adding a little bit of complication that isn't really necessary. I think the game would be a little bit smoother without them. I think they're probably also a lot more useful in a more complicated game with bigger spells. When you've got adventure cards that say things like reduce the difficulty of a spell by 1 and you're just casting Stupefy, which has a difficulty value of 0 anyway, it really isn't making much of a difference. Whereas if you've got Voldemort on the board casting Avacadabra at people, you're probably going to be much more interested in those adventure cards that make spells easier to cast. So we're ready to begin the 3rd round, and at this point I have become aware of a major fault with my playthrough up to this point. I knew this was going to happen. As I said, I am learning on the go. Apparently, when you are making rolls, if you roll the symbol, that's an exploding dice, and you can roll that again. So that success can roll again and become another success, and roll again and become another success. So there is a couple of times in this playthrough when I could have got a lot more successes than I initially thought. There is a possibility that because I overlooked that rule, certain spells didn't trigger the way they should. maybe they could have been more effective. But as both sides were affected the same way, I'm sure it will all balance out in the end. But from now on, when I'm making rolls, if I roll those symbols, I have to remember they are exploding dice. It is also worth noting that damage that you accumulate on your characters does have an effect. If you have 1 or 2 damage, the first spell you cast in a round is actually more difficult to cast. So any spells that Hermione wants to cast now are going to cost an additional power point because she has that wound on her. And if you have 3 or 4 damage on you, then you cannot re-roll exploding dice. And this is actually something interesting. This is something I like because this is the Harry Potter game and it's not really all about just trying to kill each other. Having those effects that stack as you apply damage to people encourages you to spread your damage out a little bit more. If you can get all of your opponents damaged, it's going to drain their power points far more quickly. Furthermore, by stacking up wounds on the acromantulas, they're going to lose a lot of their combat effectiveness because they're not going to be able to re-roll those exploding dice. And I do like that. I think that's interesting. I think that's the kind of thing that broadens the tactical scope of a skirmish game like this, because it's not just a case of putting as much damage as you can into just one target until it dies and then moving on to the next. You are encouraged to think a little bit more strategically, plan out ahead, and try to cripple your opponent in different ways. But enough of this, let's move on. Let's start with Ron. Ron is going to attack the acromantula directly in front of him. He's getting a bonus of 2 on this dice roll, and he rolled an additional 2 successes for a total of 4. The acromantula gets 1 success as standard, and that's a second success, and because that is an exploding dice, we do get to re-roll it. But we don't get that additional success we needed, so the acromantula will take 2 wounds. And having whacked the spiders on the head, Ron's going to do a bunk. And of course I'm moving him up to stand next to the Patronum marker. Oh, for goodness sake, I've forgotten something else. This playthrough is turning into a disaster. This is what happens when you try to learn on camera. I apologise to everybody. There was a reason I moved 2 acromantulas into that end zone. It's because they scored the land grab objective. The land grab objective reads, if at the end of any round at least 2 friendly models are in a space within or adjacent to the opponent's deployment zone, score 2 victory points. I'm just going to assume that they did that now, so that's going to go onto my victory point pile. Having completed that quest, we draw a new one. Unfortunately, we have drawn Spell Slinging. If during a round you successfully hit 3 or more enemy models with combat spells, score 2 victory points, then discard this card. If your group comprises only magical creatures, immediately gain 1 victory point, then discard this card. The problem there is I don't have the capacity to put out 3 combat spells in a round, and I don't have all magical creatures, so either way, I'm not scoring those victory points. And I don't think I get a chance to swap that one now because we're in-game, so I think I'm just stuck with that. Anyway, at this point I've completely lost track of what's going on, so I'm going to move an acromantula. We're moving that acromantula in front of Ron to try and limit his movement. We do get to attack, 3 dice, no bonus. We have hit twice. Ron automatically blocks those without needing to worry about it. Next up we're going to move Hermione. Hermione's going to make a basic move, and then she is going to use the Time Turner to advance her counter spell. Or is she? No, she's just going to use it to move again. Next up, we're going to move another acromantula. And then we're going to move Harry. Harry is no longer protected by the Patronum over there, but he will score the Find the Lair objective in a moment. He's also going to use his advanced action to cast Stupefy, and he's going to cast that on the Death Eater next to him. 2 successes as standard. That's another 2 with an exploding dice. And that's another 1. So that's 5 total. The Death Eater gets 1 defense. That's 2 and 3. And we can re-roll this one. That's 3. Not enough to block all the damage, so he does take a wound. And we mustn't forget our bookkeeping. We have to spend 1 power point for that spell. And we have to flip our token. And the other thing we must not forget is our special items. This particular Death Eater is wearing a Death Eater mask, And it says, the first time this model suffers damage in the game, it reduces the number of damage markers received by 1. So we use this item, and we immediately get to nullify that damage. I guess we should move that other Acromantula swarm. Now this Death Eater would normally chase after Hermione and try and put some more damage on her, but because of the Dark Shadows event, he can't see her. Even if he used this adventure card to move an additional space, he wouldn't actually get within range of her, so that isn't going to do him any good. So his best course of action is probably to move up into range of Ron and attack him instead with a Stupefy spell. We use 1 power token. We got 2 successes added to the 2 on our card for a total of 4. Ron defends 2 automatically. That's 3 with an exploding dice. 4 with an exploding dice. 5 with an exploding dice. 5 total. Ron is a boss. So the spell does nothing and has now been activated. We have another Death Eater who doesn't have any spells to cast. So the best thing that she can do is just try and hem Ron in so he can't go anywhere. And that is that. End of the round. We're going into turn 4. We replenish our energy. We pay for any upkeep, and we are going to pay for that Patronum still, because Ron is pretty much in a pain sandwich at the moment. So that costs us 2 of those. Of course, our heroes still have initiative, and I have just identified something here that I think would have been a better rule. Initiative is determined by the printed cunning value on your character cards, which also determines how much magic you have for the round. The first thing you do in the round is you gain your magic pool, and then you spend your magic on upkeep, and then the magic points you're left with you have for the rest of the round. I feel like initiative should be determined by the amount of magic you have in your pool, because then you've got something that represents the shifting of focus as you try to upkeep your spells. For example, if you've got a load of characters that are focusing on keeping their spells active, they're focusing on the spells and not on the ebb and flow of the battlefield, and therefore you have a situation where an opponent might be able to take advantage of that loss of focus on the larger scale of the battlefield. And I think that would be a much more interesting way to deal with initiative, because you would then have a decision point. Do I keep my spells all active because I need them, but I know that I will lose initiative to my opponent? Or do I let all my spells die, knowing that it's going to cost a lot of magic points to get them back into play, but I will have initiative for the round? I think that would have been a more interesting little tweak in the design, but that's not what we've got. What we've got here is, once again, the good guys have initiative. And they have drawn the event Scurrying Acromantula. You must place 1 Acromantula model on any free space in contact with a board edge. The Acromantula is controlled by the player who drew this card. So, I've just acquired an Acromantula. Here he is. I'm going to put him there because that is a deployment zone for the evil player, and the evil player is currently trying to score a defend objective, which means he has to keep good characters out of his deployment zone. Next up, we have to draw our adventure cards. I'm probably going to forget they exist, and speaking of things that I've forgotten, I also forgot Harry actually scored the Find the Lair objective last round. That's this one. He scored 2 victory points for that. This playthrough is an absolute mess. The replacement quest card is The More the Better. When you score any number of victory points during a round, score 1 additional victory point. Unfortunately, I cannot play that card in conjunction with the one I just scored because I didn't have it in my hand when I scored that objective. Right, turn 4, and things are getting really messy now. It's so messy, I forgot to advance all the clocks, all the cooldown clocks on the spells. Let's do that. Well, I think that's right, I don't know anymore. There's probably nobody watching at this point anyway. This has been a complete dumpster fire. Right, let's start with Hermione. She's just going to move over to this treasure token. Now, she can't actually resolve that treasure token on her own. She needs a wisdom of 10, and her wisdom is only 7. She needs either Ron or Harry to go and stand over adjacent to the token with her in order to complete that objective. Next up, let's move in Acromantula Swarm. This swarm wants to have a crack at Harry. That's 3 successes added to none for a bash for a total of 3. Harry gets 2 defenses standard. And he actually gets a success, which is an exploding success, for a total of 4. Right, Harry has no spells to cast, so he is going to take this adventure card to move 1 extra space during his movement. And then he is going to go like that. We'll move that Acromantula there to attack Ron. 2 successes, not enough to get through Ron's defense, especially with that Patronum protecting him. Ron's going to try and batter that Acromantula that's right in front of him. Sword attack with +2. Oh, so he's already scored 4 successes there, and he gets to re-roll those exploding dice. Nothing. 4 total. The Acromantula blocks 1 as standard, and blocks the other 2. Ron panics and decides to run away. Right, the last Acromantula swarm's going to have a nibble on Harry. That's 3 successes. But Harry is a boss. That's 5 blocks already. 6. 7. This Death Eater has no spells, so he's just going to go and try and stop Ron doing anything. And then for the last Death Eater, we're going to go and try and be spiteful. We're going to try and zap Harry, I think. We'll go up there. We'll cast Stupefy on him. And for fun, we're going to use this adventure card, which says 1 lucky mystery die to the model's first roll during this activation. So that means we get to roll 1 extra dice and pick the 3 highest. So there we go. That extra mystery die didn't really achieve anything. We got 2 successes there. We keep the 3. That one goes. We get to re-roll those exploding dice. For another one. Including the 2 off our sheet, that's 5 total. Harry blocks 2 as standard. And then blocks another 3 just because he's Harry. So the Stupefy spell does nothing, and that actually ends the round. And at this point, I'm going to call the game, because the game will last for 6 rounds total, and we're about to go into round 5. At this point, I already have Hermione and Harry within 4 spaces of the exit space. And if they're still standing there at the end of the game, then they will score 10 victory points. And there's not really anything that I can actually see that the evil player can do about it. We don't have any spells that can kill them in time, because we only have Stupefy. So we're going to be chipping away 1 damage point at a time. We don't have any spells that can blast them out of range. We don't have anything that can move them. So they're going to be sat there. Yeah, they're going to get those 10 victory points. Those 10 victory points added to the 2 for finding the lair means they will score 12. The bad guys will get a total of 5, and that will be a win for the heroes. At this point, I don't see any reason to continue the playthrough. I think that is game. If I have overlooked something, if I have missed something, I probably have, based on previous form for this particular playthrough, then I do apologise. But at this point, I'm calling this a win for Harry. And that's it. That's the game. How do I feel about it? It's hard to know how to feel about it, because I've learned to play as I've gone, and quite clearly I've made quite a few mistakes. Most of the mistakes have come down to, I think, actually recording the game and playing both sides at once. Because I've got to worry about the camera, I've got to worry about talking about what I'm doing, I've got to worry about keeping the cards in shot, I've got to worry about 2 different forces, I've got to worry about trying to make good strategic moves. I have to occasionally flick to certain areas of the rules book where I'm not sure on certain rules, because this is my first playthrough. So it's easier to miss things like the adventure cards, it's easier to miss things like advancing the cooldown clocks on spells, it's easier to miss things like, I should have got an extra +1 defense from the Patronum that turn, or that spider should actually not have been able to do a reroll because he's actually already got 3 wounds, or whatever. There's a lot of little things like that which are things that you pick up in time. They're things that you pick up as you play a game, and they are things that even once you know a game really well, you can quite easily overlook when you're filming on camera. That's my excuse. Anyway, so forget that for now. I'm going to move that aside. I would say the game moves pretty smoothly. I think there is a bit too much going on with the cards because you've got the event cards, the adventure cards, and the quest cards. And that's a lot to think about. I did keep forgetting those adventure cards. Again, that may have been because I was worried about filming and things. But even so, I think because each card has 2 options, you've got 6 options on the table each round. When you're thinking about what you're doing, that is the kind of thing that will get overlooked. Certainly in my experience, any game that has changing variables for each round that you put on a card at the side of the board, quite often I will forget those. One of the first really big games that I got when I got back into gaming was Arkham Horror, and that every turn you've got new cards coming out on the side of the board that have different effects that affect the whole board in play. And even now I'll forget cards that are in play sometimes when I'm playing a game of Arkham Horror. And this has that a little bit. It has those situations where after you do something you go, oh, I should have taken that adventure card and done that. I think a lot of the things like the adventure cards and the event cards, those are things that should be baked into scenarios. All of the scenarios seem very simple. There's not a lot of depth to them. There's not a lot of layered rules or anything like that, which isn't a bad thing in its own right. But then they're relying on the quest cards and the adventure cards and the event cards to shake things up. And it would be nice to have more scenarios that have layered objectives of here's your primary objective, here are a couple of secondary objectives. And I think that would be a little bit tidier, it'd be a little bit neater. I also wish that initiative could be shaken up a little bit more. I do think that maybe initiative should be based on the number of magic points you have at the start of the initiative phase, so that you can have that balance between focusing on your spells or focusing on your battle plan. I think the other problem the game has is a first edition problem. It's something that has been resolved in the second edition, but the first edition problem of the poor component quality, trying to rotate the cooldown clocks on the little cards is fiddly and annoying. With thicker tokens that are easier to manipulate, that's not such a problem. I guess that's it really. Overall, I didn't dislike this game. I actually really liked the spell slinging. I liked the cooldown mechanisms. It's frustrating when you go to cast a spell and then you go, oh no, I used that spell last turn, it's still on cooldown, I can't do the thing I wanted to do. It does force you to think a little bit further ahead. If you go for a big turn and try and do loads of different things, it will hurt you later on. And it's fun enough, but I do think it suffers from the way a lot of starter sets suffer, really. They haven't given you a lot of different spells. They haven't given you a lot of the cool spells. You end up with a lot of people slinging Stupefy at each other, doing 1 point of damage here and 1 point of damage there. And I do like the damage system. I like the fact that it has an accumulating negative impact on your performance as you play through the game. But it's a little bit... We saw that at the end of this playthrough. We got to a situation where there was no way to move or kill Harry and Hermione, which basically meant the game was in the bag. There was just nothing the Death Eaters could do at that point. And as I mentioned at the start of the playthrough, I do think there are certain spells, like the Petrifying spell, that are designed for bigger games that you cannot get out of this starter set. This starter set, really you're looking at 30 points. With a full complement of spells and items, you might be able to get to 35, 36 points for the good guys. But there's a lot of potions and things in the box that you can't even use because potions are level 1, 2 and 3, and out of the box your good force, Harry, Hermione and Ron, can only use level 1 potions. So it's a game that's designed to expand. Of course it is a miniatures game. They want you to go out and buy a lot more stuff. I think there's probably enough here to keep you interested for a little while. And the miniatures are really nice. I don't know. It's hard to say, I guess. It's hard to say. I think if you're really into the theme and you're really into buying a lot of the other miniatures, I think this could be a fun little game. I think with a lot more options, it could really open up. But I do wish that Mark Latham wouldn't keep doing these designs with all these little decks of cards that each turn you have to draw from this deck and then this deck and then this deck. And then it just layers on things that you have to keep remembering and keep doing. I'm not keen on that. But I certainly don't think this is a bad game, not from my first playthrough. I think it has limitations, and it has obvious limitations based on the fact that it is a starter set. I just wish those cooldown tokens were a bit thicker. But I guess that's it from me for now. If you have made it to this point in the playthrough, well done, because this has been a disaster. I can't say I'm going to be doing a lot more learning to play games on camera, because this was very messy and I don't know how useful it's going to be for anyone. I thought it might be interesting to see kind of a first experience with the game on the table, because it is a little bit gappy in the rules, because some of the components aren't great. I thought it would be interesting to see a first experience of the game on the table. I didn't really think I would make as many mistakes as I did. I didn't think I would forget things as often as I did. So I do apologise for that. But hopefully this has given a perhaps more accurate, honest reflection of a first dive into this game. And if it hasn't, then I do apologise. But thank you so much for watching. If you have enjoyed the video, please consider pressing the like button. If you've really enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so. And hopefully, I will see you all again very soon. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.